I can't believe I'm the only one without food. That's just cruel, mother-in-law." As the eldest son's wife yells, she covers her face with both hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Just as her words imply, all that's in front of her is an empty glass and a solitary fork. The relatives seem to finally catch on to the situation and begin to jeer one after another. Whoa, could this be Emily's debut of tormenting her daughter-in-law? I'm on Team Naomi. Ghost mother-in-law, stop the torment. Begone, evil spirit. Dear daughter-in-law, don't cry. It's a mix of 10% concern and 90% just messing around. I shrug my shoulders at the relatives who are starting to get tipsy from the drinks. For them, the discord between me and the eldest son's wife might just be another piece of entertainment at the New Year's celebration. In that case, as the host, I need to entertain our guests even more. Of course, this includes the very person who caused this situation, the eldest son's wife. All right, I'll go get Naomi's portion too, so just wait a moment. With resolution, I clutch a tray to my chest and head back to the kitchen. My name is Emily Johnson, 62 years old. After losing my beloved husband 2 years ago, and my eldest son moving out after getting married a year ago, I've been living alone in this house. I can't say I don't feel lonely, but as someone who enjoys her own company, living alone isn't particularly hard for me. That's why I've been politely declining every time my eldest son invites me to live with him. I didn't want to intrude on his newlywed life, and fortunately, I have a lot of relatives living nearby, so I haven't been lonely. However, I would later come to understand the real meaning behind my son's persistent invitations to live together. It was an SOS from my eldest son. "Mom, please come and help me right away." It was one night a few months after my eldest son got married. My eldest son suddenly called me. It was dinner time and I was just about to eat my meal. "What's the matter? Why are you calling at this time?" "I'll explain later. For now, it's an emergency. I hate to impose, but can you come to my house right away?" Getting a sudden call without any explanation left me briefly perplexed. My eldest son's house was located in the neighboring county. It wasn't an impossible distance to cover right now, but it wasn't exactly around the corner either. Still, something in my eldest son's demeanor told me this was no ordinary matter, so I decided to put my dinner on hold and head to his house. What I found there was something I'll probably never forget. Part of the kitchen in their newly built house had been blackened by soot. The smell of burning and heat filled the air, and remnants of foam from a fire extinguisher were still scattered here and there. And right next to that kitchen, my daughter-in-law was crying inconsolably. What on earth happened here? Well, we had a bit of a fire. Naomi was so upset I had to call you. I hate to ask, but could you help us clean up? According to my son, my daughter-in-law was cooking dinner when suddenly a pillar of fire shot up from the pan. I managed to put out the fire in the pan with a wet rag, but sparks flew and ignited the surroundings. I used the fire extinguisher to take care of the rest, but it made a mess of the kitchen. While he was telling me this, I noticed that he was holding an ice pack to his arm. It seems he had burned himself while putting out the fire. I decided to postpone cleaning the kitchen and started tending to my son's burn. Luckily, the burn wasn't severe, but this could have been a major disaster. Perhaps it's a blessing that this was the extent of the damage. Is Naomi all right? Did she get burned or anything? I'm fine. She didn't seem to have any burns as far as I could see, but Naomi was the one cooking, and it seemed strange that she was unharmed given the fierceness of the fire. When I asked about this, I found out the cause of the fire. Naomi, it seems, was scared of oil splattering when she was frying frozen croquettes. After some hesitation, she tossed a few croquettes from the edge of the kitchen into the pan. This caused the oil to splatter, and when the heated oil reached its limit, it ignited the gas stove, causing a pillar of fire. "I was so scared. I'm afraid of frying stuff," my daughter-in-law continued sobbing. Even though she was shaken, it would have been nice if she could at least help with her husband's first aid. As I cleaned up the kitchen, I let out a small sigh. In the end, cleaning the kitchen took about 3 hours. I ended up catching the last train home, and throughout that time, my daughter-in-law did nothing to help with the cleaning. She just kept complaining about how my favorite pot and I had a hard time choosing the kitchen wallpaper. Could it be that my daughter-in-law is bad at cooking? That suspicion turned into a certainty a few months later on my birthday. At my age, my own birthday isn't exactly a special day. It's more of a moment to reflect on getting another year older. Without my husband, I didn't feel any desire to be celebrated, so I planned to spend the day leisurely enjoying my hobby of cooking. But unexpectedly, I received another invitation from my son and his wife. They wanted to treat me to dinner to celebrate my birthday and to apologize for the previous incident. With that in mind, I decided to visit my son's house once again. But there, I found myself embroiled in another unforgettable incident. What dish is this supposed to be? I looked at the object piled high on the plate before me, hesitating before I asked. If I had to describe it as is, I would say it resembles a lump of coal that's on fire. Anyone would think the same if they saw the small black lump sitting atop a heap of carelessly torn raw cabbage. Don't you recognize it? It's fried chicken. Christmas is coming up, so I thought it would be a surprise. Believe it or not, I've been working hard to conquer my fear of deep frying. My eldest son's wife puffed out her chest as if to say, impressive, right? Upon hearing this, I sent a quick glance toward the kitchen. Despite the lingering signs of a fire incident, it seemed that a major catastrophe like last time was avoided. If my eldest son's wife, who was once terrified of frying, had managed to overcome her fears, then surely it was something worthy of praise. But then, fried chicken? I gazed down once again at the black lump before me. Upon closer examination, I could see spots that had turned a brownish hue from being fried. Perhaps she'd been overly cautious due to her fear of frying, causing it to char. Even if it was burned, it must still taste good, right? Despite my attempts at self-reassurance, it was a tough sell. But refusing to eat it was not an option. Looking at my eldest son, who was nervously hanging his head beside his excited wife, I braced myself to take a bite. The true value of a dish is not in its appearance. After all, my daughter-in-law had gone to the trouble of preparing this for me. I couldn't just dismiss her effort, so I mustered the courage to bite into the lump. Ignoring the burnt smell, I chewed. The outer shell, which felt like charcoal, made a crunching noise and crumbled, revealing the rubbery texture of the meat underneath, filling my mouth. It was a taste unlike any I've experienced before. What had she used to marinate it? It was incredibly sweet, and the burnt parts were bitter. Honestly, I wanted to spit it out right away. Despite the unpleasant taste, I somehow managed to swallow it with the help of some water and mustered up a smile. Ooh, it's tasty. Probably the hardest I've ever worked to say anything in my life. My efforts seemed to pay off as my daughter-in-law beamed with joy. It's a common story on daytime TV, a mother-in-law criticizing her daughter-in-law's cooking leading to a family discord. A single offhand comment from the mother-in-law can place the son in the middle of a dispute which could lead to the breakdown of the marriage. But it seems like I've managed to dodge that bullet. Just as I let out a sigh of relief, my daughter-in-law mercilessly placed the next dish before me. She described it as a seafood soup, but seeing the raw shrimp in the overflowing green liquid, I felt a bit dizzy. Now I find myself in the hospital getting an IV drip. My memory is a bit fuzzy for the 2 to 3 days after the dinner party, but it seems I was found collapsed at home due to severe abdominal pain and dehydration. A relative who happened to visit found me and took me to the hospital. The doctor told me it was food poisoning caused by a bacterium called Campylobacter. When asked if I'd eaten any undercooked chicken, everything fell into place. Fried chicken. Remembering that hellish texture and flavor, a shiver ran down my spine, and I became convinced. My eldest son's wife's cooking is beyond just bad. My son is in danger. Something must be done, and soon. While I was recovering, I got in touch with my son and found out he was in the hospital with food poisoning. Both husband and wife were bedridden, or so I thought. It turned out Naomi hadn't eaten any of the food she had cooked, and she was perfectly fine. Naomi doesn't eat her own cooking? I asked. I'm not sure about during the day, but she's on some sort of diet for breakfast and dinner, always eating salads and smoothies. That's probably why she doesn't realize how disastrous her cooking is, my son explained. But she must at least taste it, right? I argued. I don't know if she doesn't taste it or if she just can't tell it's bad. Either way, I'm at a loss, he replied. So you've been eating that food all this time? It's okay to have different tastes, but it's definitely bad for your health. Why not excuse yourself from it from now on? I suggested. While giving this advice, I had a change of heart. It might be difficult. When she caused the small fire, Naomi never apologized to the end and only complained. Even if we pointed out her poor cooking skills, she might not admit her faults. Worse, she might become agitated. My son seemed to understand this as well and laughed as if he had given up. At first, I couldn't stand the bad food and always wanted to live with you, but even if we live together now, Naomi has a high pride and won't relinquish the kitchen. She even gets furious when I try to cook. I was careless and got food poisoning this time, but recently, I've learned to defend myself enough to avoid being hospitalized. Don't worry, he assured me. Really? I said. Even so, there's no way it's healthy for him to keep eating food that doesn't suit his palate. As a small aid, I asked my son to bring Naomi to our home for the New Year's celebration. Many relatives would come, and it wouldn't be a problem if the number of people increased by 2. I would cook a feast with my skills. My son was happy to accept the offer, looking forward to my home-cooked meals. I'm glad. I could potentially teach Naomi some cooking under the pretense of giving her recipes for any dishes she liked. But reality took an unexpected turn. After celebrating the New Year with my son and his wife, who came over on New Year's Eve, I woke up in the morning to find the dishes I had prepared over several days completely changed. When I went to the kitchen and saw the catastrophe, everything went dark before my eyes. Good morning, Mom. Thank you for the delicious dinner last night. As a thank you, I helped with the New Year's celebration dishes you had prepared, Naomi said with a laugh. Helped? You mean this? This isn't a prank? I exclaimed. No way, Mom. I would never prank you. I just made a few tweaks. Party food can be boring if it's always the same, right? I thought a change like this might be good, Naomi responded, grinning innocently. I was speechless in front of her smile, but I felt like something was falling apart under me. All the dishes I had spent days preparing for today, I had procured only the freshest of ingredients. In honor of the new year, I had even splurged on some usually pricey items. Now they were just glorified garbage. Ignoring my eldest daughter-in-law's gleeful explanations, I dug around hoping to find something, anything that was salvageable. In the end, everything I had prepared was ruined. The only things unscathed were pre-packaged foods, beverages, and a few ingredients. On top of that, there simply wasn't enough time to start all over. Kai, I hate to ask this, but can you head to any open supermarket right now and grab anything that we could serve at the table? It's New Year's Day. Chances of finding any party food left on shelves, those that usually require pre-ordering, would be slim. Even so, I just needed something, anything I could serve as a side dish. Kai, my eldest son, understanding my predicament, immediately agreed to run the errands. In the end, I managed to plate up a few dishes, using the store-bought deli items and the leftover ingredients we had, successfully saving face, at least in appearances. Of course, during all this, I didn't let my daughter-in-law anywhere near the kitchen. Compared to the feast I had planned, it was pitiful, but I had no other choice. As long as we could get through today, that's all that mattered. Just as I thought that, my invited relatives started to arrive one after the other. Happy New Year! Thanks again for the invite. I've been looking forward to Emily's cooking all year. Long time no see, Kai and Naomi. How have you been? The relatives greeted each other and took their seats at the table. We began with communion wine for the toast, but soon everyone switched to their preferred beers and started eating while enjoying their conversations. They were so engrossed in their chats that no one seemed to notice the unusual dishes in front of them. My eldest daughter-in-law, who was kicked out of the kitchen early, was sulking at the table, still not quite comprehending the situation. Then she noticed that there was no plate of deli food in front of her. She looked up at me. Mother-in-law, my portion is... There's no portion for you. While poking at the plate in front of me, I replied curtly. The relatives, sensing the tense atmosphere, stopped their chatters. Taking advantage of the sudden attention, my daughter-in-law dramatically filled her eyes with tears and covered her face with her hands. It's cruel not to serve me food while everyone else has theirs. This is too much, mother-in-law. As her words suggested, in front of my daughter-in-law was only an empty glass and a lone fork. The relatives seemed to finally catch on to the situation, beginning to jeer one after another. Oh, is this Emily's debut as the wicked mother-in-law? All right, I'm rooting for Naomi. Mother-in-law from hell, stop your bullying. Out with the evil spirits. Stay strong, bride. It seemed a 10% worry and 90% mischief mix. As I shrugged at the relatives already tipsy from the booze, I realized for them the friction between me and the eldest son's wife was nothing more than New Year's entertainment. As the host, I had to entertain the guests further. Even the main instigator of this situation, the eldest son's wife, was no exception. Can't be helped. I'll bring Naomi's share too, so just wait a bit. Resolute, I hugged the tray to my chest and returned to the kitchen. Before long, I returned to the living room with an oval platter in hand. It was a seafood platter. The relatives loved seafood, so this platter was something I had reserved a month in advance for this very day. Both the relatives and the eldest son's wife probably thought that another dish was being brought out for each of them. They were surprised by the sudden appearance of a large dish, but of course, I meant the part arranged by the eldest son's wife. There was no way they could understand that. The eldest son's wife in particular looked pleased, probably thinking it was finally time to showcase the dish she had arranged. Oh, we've been waiting. What's this, seafood as well? I was thinking there was surprisingly little variety this year. Looks delicious. Let's dig in. As soon as I set it on the table, the relatives' forks extended towards it. But predictably, as soon as they put the seafood in their mouths, screams echoed from everywhere. Ah, what on earth is this? Sweet seafood? Relatives began visibly grimacing and reaching for water. That was hardly surprising. The seafood platter was heavily dressed in honey. Conceivably, a seasoned chef might successfully combine seafood and honey, but the creative touch was unfortunately added by the eldest son's wife. There was undoubtedly some other unfathomable ingredient mixed in. Naomi tweaked the recipe for you all, right? Yes, I got the idea from a maple syrup salmon poke bowl. But it wasn't just honey. The oysters were topped with caramel sauce, and the crab was sprinkled with tiny golden pieces of paper. Upon closer inspection, they were actually pieces of origami. It's for the New Year's celebration. Don't you often see it in full-course meals? Well, those usually come with edible gold leaf, not paper that can't be eaten. Seems like the relatives agreed. All of them put down their forks with strained expressions. They must have expected the dish to be met with high praise. The relatives awkwardly explained, Naomi, you do have a sweet tooth. We, on the other hand, prefer spicy food, while the eldest son's wife dropped her shoulders in disappointment. Next, I served the homemade roast beef. It was one of my husband's favorites and a long-standing dish in our family. However, even when I placed the large pot of it on the table, no one reached out with their forks. It made sense. No one could explain why the roast beef was stewing in a pot except for the eldest son's wife, of course. I found this big chunk of meat, so I decided to stew it in red wine. Doesn't it look tasty? Please, help yourselves. So that was it. The unnaturally dark color was from the red wine. However, it was clear from the smell that the alcohol hadn't been cooked off, and the color was far from being produced by red wine alone. At least it looked like it was mixed with powdered chili or bean paste, or it might have been colored with paint. It wouldn't be out of character for the eldest son's wife, and it wasn't funny. You all mentioned earlier that you like spicy food, right? This should pair well with your drinks. Go on, go on. Having just rejected her previous dish, the relatives likely felt they couldn't escape this time. They hesitantly picked out the once roast beef from the pot and took a bite. Then screams echoed again. From their repeated calls for water, it seemed it was too spicy this time. This is ridiculous. What kind of sick joke is this? This isn't fit for human consumption. Even dog food is better than this. Finally, it seemed they had reached their limit. One after another, harsh words were hurled at the eldest son's wife. Upon witnessing the relatives' reactions, the eldest son's wife finally understood the harsh criticism her creative dish received, and she burst into tears. You're all so cruel. I worked so hard on this. Turning Mom's cooking into garbage and then complaining about it? Unbelievable. The eldest son glared at his wife in disgust. This roast beef was a dish that the eldest son often enjoyed, making his anger even more potent. You turned it into garbage. So this was originally Emily's cooking? That's correct. Everything on that plate is store-bought. Naomi turned all the chicken noodle soup and party foods I prepared in advance into waste, so I had no choice but to buy these. Waste? Such a term. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said poison, considering what was found next to the pot. I held up an empty spice bottle for everyone to see. The label read nutmeg, a common spice typically used in meat dishes. As of last night, this bottle was unopened, meaning that Naomi must have dumped the entire bottle into the pot. Do you know nutmeg is a wonderful spice that can make meat dishes delicious in small amounts, but it can actually be poisonous? There have been instances of people dying from overdosing. The lethal dose is only 10 grams, the most common poison, isn't it? No way. By the way, this bottle contains 15 grams, considering all of it was dumped into the pot. If you finished eating, it's certainly enough to invite death. Stop joking! Are you trying to send us to the hospital? Accusations turned into shouts of anger as the reality of nearly being served poison on top of food, worse than dog food, set in. Overwhelmed, Naomi began crying and pleading. But I didn't know. Nutmeg goes with meat, right? I just wanted to make it tastier. It's not my fault. Yeah, you said the same thing before. You didn't know about Campylobacter. Nobody taught you. Yeah, that's right. You never learned the basics of cooking from anyone. Didn't listen to any advice. Didn't even properly read a cookbook. You just cook on a whim, not even tasting your own food. That's why you end up making garbage. At her husband's harsh words, Naomi stopped crying. She probably thought her husband would side with her, but he mercilessly called the dish garbage and turned to the relatives. He seemed still angry that the relatives had deemed me a demon mother-in-law without knowing the full story. Now you understand why my mother didn't serve Naomi food. She ruined my mother's cooking, and she's not even remorseful about it. There's no need for you to prepare a decent meal for someone like that. Isn't that right? If you still side with Naomi, I will cut ties with you all, here and now. Faced with the eldest son's reasonable argument, the relatives bowed their heads in silence, as if to drive the point home. When I asked, "Would you like seconds?" and moved the meat closer, the relatives screamed, backed away, and even some fell from their chairs. As I remained silent, they eventually began to mutter apologies in dry voices. After that, the remorseful relatives ate only the original store-bought dishes, and each of them went home, each with words of apology. The eldest son's wife tried to sneak away amidst the chaos, but my son and I didn't miss it. We made sure she sat down and took responsibility for the mess she'd created. And of course, that meant making sure she ate her own creation. As a result, she's now in the hospital. She could only manage a few bites of any of the dishes. While it was a bit unsatisfying from my perspective, I think it was a good opportunity for her to learn just how outrageous her cooking was. Afterwards, I was left with the problem of dealing with the leftovers. After some thought, I decided to take them with me when I visited my eldest son's wife in the hospital. I figured if I showed them to her doctor, they'd understand the cause of her illness. However, I had the good fortune to bump into her parents who were also visiting. As things naturally played out, I ended up handing the leftovers to them. As a result, upon discharge, my eldest son's wife was immediately sent back to live with her parents. Her parents apologized profusely, saying things like, "We had no idea she was feeding Kai such horrible things," and "We don't need any money for medical expenses. If you want to divorce, we're okay with that." So my son and I, who had been harboring resentment all this while, finally felt like we could let it go. And as for our relatives, they lavished us with expensive meats, fine liquors, and fresh fish as an apology. When I said it was too much for me alone to eat, they suggested we start the New Year celebration anew, which made my son and I burst out laughing. "You know, it's just not the New Year without Emily's cooking," they said. Those words warmed my heart. After all, the purpose of cooking is to bring joy to others. So I will continue to hone my skills and make those who look forward to my cooking smile.